We're live 9:19 in the morning, the day after Thanksgiving. Hopefully you guys all had a good Thanksgiving holiday that you like we all do, ate way too much and then maybe saved a little bit of room for dessert, hopefully, and then ate too much of that. Maybe we used to have a family football game every year that we would for Thanksgiving, all the families would all get together and we'd go out and have a football game. And for a long time, it was a tackle game, and then it turned to a touch football game, and then it turned into we're not even gonna have the football game because everybody was just too sore. Especially, it was bad when you weren't working out at all, which was a lot of us for a while. And so you'd go play football, and you'd be because you're playing against your friends and family members. So then you would go and try as hard as you can, run as fast as you can for as long as you can, and try to make moves to juke the other guy and put the moves on them. And so you'd be working your body a lot harder than it has since probably the last football game. And then the problem is you'd go after the football game, you'd go sit down, and because we'd play in the morning for Thanksgiving, and then you try to get up and you couldn't even move. I mean, even by dinner, it was awful. The next day was even worse. So everybody would be sore, and they're like, you know what, we can't do this. Most of us started working out more so that we were at least in a little bit better shape for the football game. So that wasn't the only time that we did something, but it was a lot of fun. And those kinds of family traditions are very, very cool. So I know lots of guys that go out and have football games or play baseball or play soccer or whatever the deal is you're doing. Let me know what you guys have. If you guys have family traditions that you guys have done during Thanksgiving, that would be cool. Maybe you guys all get together and go out and race go-karts or whatever, race tractors. I don't know, whatever it is. All of that is good stuff because it's, you look back and those are the kind of memories that you have with your family and your kids and stuff. And because it's cool to, because it had been going on long enough that we'd gone through generations of people basically. So we had, when you have kids and then eventually the kids get old enough to they're like, I want to play in the game. You're like, okay, well, and then you hand it off to them and try to block for them and stuff. And then some people get old. Some of the older people get old enough to where they just can't do it anymore, don't want to do it anymore, don't want to take a chance on getting hurt, and they move out, and the younger kids move in, and obviously the younger kids are younger and faster and stronger and all of that. So it's a whole changing of the guards kind of thing. So it's a cool deal. So let me know what you guys have that you guys have done. But today we're going to talk about the thumbnail that I have up is actually on a turbocharged. I'm pretty sure it's a 440. I don't think it was a 455 Buick. I think it was a 440. I think it was the one that Freiberger loaned me that we ended up running a single turbo on, and we ran like 7 pounds or something on it. And it was just a low compression, probably a motorhome 440 that had been sitting around for a long time. But we ended up running boost on it. And as I like to do with all of these turbo combinations, whenever I can, we like to turn out the lights. And so, you can see the glow, see the afterglow of the turbo, or during the glow, basically, while the thing's running. So the longer that you make the pull, the more that you'll see this. And a lot of guys, and we did this early on too, a lot of guys will want to use, we use an EGT probe to monitor the exhaust gas temperature and then try to correlate that in some way to air fuel. Oh, look, it's too hot, it's running lean, or it's, it's too rich, it's running whichever direction you're going to go on that. And I had an EGT probe in my Mustang, on my supercharged Mustang, for a long time. And I kind of used it as a gauge on how well it was tuned also. But I combined that with a secondary variable. And that was that when I had this particular, before I would take it out to the Silver State, and this is how I knew that it was tuned well. I was going to be looking for an EGT number, but I'd be more looking for this one particular on-ramp onto the freeway. I knew that if it spun the tires really hard in like second or third gear, whichever it was, that was the indicator that the thing is, oh, it's working good. It feels good. It's making good power. And then you correlate that with an EGT number, because this was a supercharged 5-liter deal. And you correlate with that with an EGT number, thinking that there was some direct correlation there with how it felt. And then what that number was telling me, because I didn't have an air fuel meter. I did eventually put one of those little LED BZ meters in it that you hook up to your factory O2 sensor, which worked fairly well. Actually, I was kind of surprised. I did a comparison. One of the dyno shops down in Huntington Beach in California loaned me their Hariba air fuel meter, and we put it in the car and ran it, and kind of we just visually compared it to what the BZ meter was telling us versus what that meter was telling us. And it was comparable. It was certainly close enough. I wasn't looking at whether, because we're only looking at LED lights. Is it green? Is it red? Is it yellow? We were looking at those in the position, and then the scale that they had written on there where these LEDs were. We're looking at that scale and going, oh yeah, it's when it's cruising, it's 14.7. It's doing that. It's bouncing around 14.5, 6, whatever, one or two LED numbers there in the middle. And then when we go to wide open throttle, it goes to the rich side, and when we decel, it goes initially rich and then lean, or whatever it was doing. But when we were at wide open throttle is the time that we were concerned about it, because we want to make sure that, well, it's cruising around, it's going to self-adjust anyway. It's in closed loop. But at wide open throttle, it was not. And so at wide open throttle, we wanted to make sure while it was under boost that it was like somewhere below 12 is kind of what we wanted. We wanted something in the 11s. I would take a 12.02 for what we were doing because it was only 7 pounds. And for the Silver State, I always put good gas in it. That's the one time that I would spend money on good gas. And sometimes the good gas just meant 91 plus 5 gallons of some kind of race fuel that they had out there, or a double dose of Octane booster or something, something like that. But when we correlated the Hariba versus that little BZ meter, I was surprised at how well it did. It showed that they were comparable. It was certainly within, I don't know, a half an air fuel point or less, maybe even less, if we could actually put a value on the position of one of the LEDs lighting up and then kind of lighting up and halfway lighting up, as it transitions from one to the other. There weren't enough LEDs there to get graduations as fine as we would want them, but it seemed to be fairly accurate. So it told us what was going on. And so from then on, we kind of realized that or utilized that. And I would use the Crane interceptor that I eventually got, and I could tune with that. For the most part, though, early on, we had done injectors and FMUs, which was not ideal. It allowed you to run boost, but was not ideal. And then we also integrated a boost timing retard that would take timing, because that's the critical things. You want to take timing away, and we did it based on boost. So you could adjust it to half a degree of 1 degree per pound of boost, 1.5 to whatever you thought was appropriate based on whatever kind of fuel that you were using. And so we would tune it like that. And then eventually we got to a Pro MS air meter and bigger injectors. And then we still used the boost retard deal. And then the Crane interceptor got, even cooler and a little bit more adjustability. And then toward the end of me running that, we could tune the factory ECU with chips. We did a couple of those with the guys from Kenny Bell before I pulled the motor out of it, and we started using it for engine dyno testing, and then the car just sat for a really long time, and it's still sitting to this day. But the question is, and this will be our poll for this morning, by the way, morning motivation, get your projects done. So if you have a project like the Mustang that I'm describing that definitely needs to go back together, make sure that you're getting that done. Okay, so does the EGT reading that you have on your gauge show whether the motor is rich or lean? So yes or no on that. You're not choosing one. You're not choosing rich or lean. You're choosing yes or no. Does it indicate an air fuel mixture? Does the EGT change with air fuel mixture, basically? And so the discussion really today, as people are going to our poll, the problem with EGTs, and I use this a lot, and this is more so, and we'll talk about this a little bit, because this is more so on a supercharged and turbocharged application. If you if you correlate EGT, like if we had our BZ meter and we're reading that, and we're watching our air fuel, or watching our EGT meter, and we correlate those, and we only change air fuel, you should actually see a change in EGT, or you can. So there is some correlation. So for the people that are answering the thing, there can be a correlation between air fuel and EGT. Here's the problem, though. That's not the only thing, and it's actually not even the primary thing that affects exhaust gas temperature. This is especially the case on boosted applications. But on NA applications, if we change the timing, like if we were to take a bunch of timing out of it, we'd see a big spike in EGTs. So timing obviously has a big effect on EGTs. And this really holds true on boosted applications, turbocharged and supercharged applications, because what happens when we add boost to something? Almost every time we will reduce timing. So if you run a boosted application where you are running 30 degrees NA, you may only run 20 degrees under boost, and even less as the boost goes up. So as we go up in boost and we go down in timing, typically we go up in EGT. Now we also add fuel to this. And so we typically, on a boosted application, we run more fuel. We run a richer air fuel mixture, which can also bring EGTs down. Although if there's afterburn, it could bring them up. So there's an awful lot going on there. And the other thing that can happen on the EGTs is, if you have, we've seen EGTs climb a lot on steady state, like loaded uphill climbs. You know, and this is kind of the cool thing about having them, is that you come to read this thing under different circumstances, under different driving conditions. Like for me, it was primarily, I wanted to see what was going on, like a wide open throttle, sustained wide open throttle, like the Silver State, because that's what I cared about at the time. We did some top speed testing too, but primarily I was doing it at the Silver State. And the nice thing about the Silver State is you have lots of time. If you're at wide open throttle for 30 minutes, you have time for the thing to stabilize. And then when you see, because we saw during the Silver State, you would see a change in the load. Because even though you're at wide open throttle, if you're at wide open throttle going down a hill, the load's different than if you're at wide open throttle going on a flat level ground, or, as was often the case there, wide open throttle going up a hill. Because as long as the car would go around the turn and go flat, there would be no lifting. So you had to drive it because you were going pretty fast in a supercharged Mustang. But you would see it, you would definitely see a change in EGT. So you'd also see that while you're driving around in day-to-day driving. Oh, what does it do? What does it do in traffic? What does it do at idle? What does it do cruising down the freeway at like 70 miles an hour at less than 2,000 RPM? What is it doing there? And then you'd have to correlate that to learn about what's going on. Okay, what's happening? What is my timing doing there? And that's where the Crane Interceptor really was very beneficial, really came into play, because we could monitor that. It would read out what the timing is in real time while you were driving. So you can look at the data screen and go, oh, look, under cruise, under very light throttle at 2,000 RPM, we might be at 45 degrees of timing or more. So cruising down the road, 14.7, lots of timing, very little load. It's not going to detonate. It gets better mileage that way. And then the EGT and then we could correlate those different spots with EGT and go, okay, in this scenario, it's going to do this. Because sometimes just because you have high EGTs doesn't necessarily mean that you have high loads and wide open throttle and all of the retarded timing. So it's an interesting tool, and I liked it a lot. The limitation is that a lot of guys will use it in lieu of an air fuel meter, and I just don't think it's a good idea, because we can alter it so much with timing and keep the air fuel the same that it's not telling you a change in air fuel, it's telling you a change in something else. So it's not something that we relied on for and obviously we did that a lot early on with brake specific numbers too on the dyno. But even that, I just didn't like it. It was much better. I felt much more comfortable after we introduced a good wideband air fuel mixture, because taking the plugs out and looking at them after a dyno pull was not only time consuming, but I didn't trust it as much as I trust a meter telling me. Because the other thing that happens is, if we see a variation in the air fuel during the run, which for a carbureted, which we ran a lot of carbureted stuff back in the day, for a carbureted deal, not unusual at all. So did it go up to 13.5 and then drop back down to 12.2? And then, you're not going to see that in a spark plug. You won't see, if you make a pull, you're not going to see the big variation, because there's not going to be multiple there's not going to be multiple timing marks on the strap. You're not going to see multiple air fuel indications when you look down inside the plug. You're not going to see that. It isn't there, but the air fuel meter will actually tell you that. So having that there was a much better way of allowing us to tune at different RPM ranges. And then especially once we introduced fuel injection, where we could kind of actually do that. It was a little more difficult doing the carbureted deal, because it's hard to get a change at one specific RPM with a carburetor and then not have it do something else somewhere else. But EGTs are EGT is data. So it's always good to have more data. That's always beneficial, but I don't like using it for air fuel. We do see we can use it more. I would feel more comfortable using it for timing. And then possibly it would be something that you might utilize for maybe back pressure and cam timing on a specialized turbo application. But even then, I would think I would still be looking at an air fuel meter more than that. So let's see what you guys are doing this morning. Let's see if you guys had a good. So we got. Does EGT reading show whether the motor is rich or lean? 57% are saying no. 43% are saying yes. Timing also affects EGT. Yep, it's so early. It is. I was actually up very early because I was up before the market opened, because I was talking to my buddy Jimmy again about I'm trying to learn about day trading. Tackle to touch. Yep. Yeah, that's right. It is Black Friday, right? I know. When I was talking to Jimmy, he said it was odd that he had been to a couple of stores early this morning and walked in, and they had lots and lots of people there working. And he went in and asked a couple of guys. He's like, "Where's the crowd?" He said, "I don't know, man. They didn't show up." I think more people are shopping online, probably. Got some Keith Black 116 30 overs for my 5-liter. Pushing 70, got to agree. There comes a point where you don't. I mean, because the problem is that as we get older and older, that when you're playing football or something like that, and if you were to get tackled wrong or whatever and break a leg, it's much harder to recover as you get older for stuff like that. Or just listening to you tell me about it. Doctor told me to realize you're getting old. Said that's how you learn not to do things like playing football. Football is still fun though. Even when we were playing touch, it was great because I still enjoyed it. I always ran and stuff, so I was in pretty decent shape. Brisbane, Australia's in the house. Nope, I'm not from Brisbane, but Brisbane is cool. Doctors speculate, but seldom know the extent of the football game. There was always at least one person that got injured, and it usually wasn't somebody that's older. It's usually somebody that's younger. They would, because the easy thing to do if you're jumping up, catching passes and things like that in that kind of football game, especially if you haven't stretched too much or haven't worked out for the last few months, it's easy to come down, just do something silly, just like roll your ankle or something. That hurts bad. Metal and coating will change EGTs. Yep. I have used aluminum exhaust too, and they to bring weight down. And as long as it's far enough back where the EGTs have calmed down enough that it's not melting aluminum, it works pretty well. We always played horseshoes. That would be good. Wayne from Maine. And Wayne's even throwing out the rhymes up there. So which meter is better? I like an air fuel meter. I don't know if they still run the Silver State or not. I haven't looked for it for quite a while. Cyber Monday is big. It is big. Francisco is here from Mexico City. Age is the only number. That's right. Get out and play. Keep exercising. That's what I tell my dad. Every day I want you walking, and that's important. Pull a hammy. That's not good. Google wants to know if there are any piston deals out there for Black Fridays. Anybody know of anybody? JE, Wiseco, any of those guys? Are they selling pistons? Speedmaster. Pontiac had aluminum heads on some of the 421 factory race cars. They had a disclaimer not to run them longer than 15 seconds at wide open throttle. Why? Were they porous or something, Dan? What was the problem with them? So I know that was a problem on some of the early, I remember the guys from West Tech telling me about when AFR first started, the brownfield heads, that initially they had porosity issues, but they were able to cure it. Oh, aluminum headers. Okay. I didn't read that correctly, did I? Aluminum headers make sense. Summit brands are 10% off, making the Forge LS pistons under $500. Nice. And their Pro LS stuff is pretty good. That stuff works well. At least the ones that I've tested have worked good. And I don't know how they wouldn't work good or work well, given what you can do with a stock piston. I don't know how almost any kind of forged piston is not going to be better than that. So our poll is getting split even Steven almost. 51% saying no and 49% saying yes. Yep, Todd, pulling a hammy. It's not good. There was some of that too. People would pull muscles and stuff. I don't remember if anybody ever had a dislocated shoulder. Luckily, Lisa's brother and one of the other guys that would come and play football with us were through some of this. He's a fireman now, but he was an EMT, so hopefully they could provide assistance. Does octane level? I haven't seen that happen. If there are other things in the fuel, like is it oxygenated, but the octane itself doesn't affect air fuel ratio. It is kind of a trick question. That's why I threw it out there, because the holidays are over. Well, that holiday's over. Well, my truck sits parked in my driveway. I watched it again. What you need to do, Todd, is you need to take away. Just take away a bunch of timing. Take away a bunch of timing and add a bunch of fuel. Yes, I know it's not going to feel as spicy, but it will be safe. We use some Inconel headers. They're only 20 thousandths thick. That'd be pretty light. We got them secondhand. Where they were almost 10 grand. I know my buddy Bernie was a crew chief for the guys at Osco, the Porsche guys. And at the time, though, they were racing a BMW, and they had crashed a BMW, and it was a V8. It was either an M5 or an M3. I think it was a V8 in the M3, if I remember right. But they flew a guy in to make custom Inconel headers for that. And then in the crash, they were damaged. So they built a fixture to fix them because they were so much money. But I think that's what they were like. I'm sure that they were 8 or 10 grand. It's a lot of money for headers. I run the Innovate Motorsports multi-gauge. That's what I ran when I set the record in the Civic. That's what I ran that for years and years and years. In fact, that might still be in there with the guy that I sold it to. So we run that, and I have that set up so that I'm watching it while I'm making the run to make sure that it's staying. Oh, is it staying in the 11s? It still seems to be happy. Still seems to be happy. So I can watch that to make sure that I would look at that and think, okay, at least that's going to tell me what the air fuel is doing. And since we had already tuned it, the timing should be doing what the timing is doing, but I'm not watching the timing in real time. Richard, if you have a $7,000 budget to work with for an NA street strip build, you had to start with a marketplace salvage yard short block. Do I have $7,000 just to build the motor? That's going to be way more than I need. What's your honest opinions on EFI setups like Tech and the Holly Sniper versus a carburetor? I don't know about Sniper because I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know if you're talking about a 4-hole deal. If I wouldn't pick any of those versus a carburetor. I wouldn't pick any of those fuel injection systems over a carburetor. If I was putting together a motor that had a carbureted style intake manifold on it, I'd put a carburetor on it. NA street strip 90s Civic gutted with a built K24 motor is a 10-second car. An NA K24 or a turbo K24? The cheapest way to go would be to, well, it used to be to get a Fox body, but that's not the case anymore. Although you might be able to find 4-cylinder ones. But $7,000 for the motor would be that you could easily just put a turbo LS together for less than that. What I know about tubing now, I'd straighten out any bent, flattened tubes with hydraulic pressure. That's what they did. They welded flanges to it and then pressurized it and then heated it up and basically just pushed the dents back out. I'm all about cheap Summit $150 headers. I cringe at buying a set of $300 Sandersons for my LS. That seems like a lot. But all of the stainless headers are big money also, except the ones that we use for the turbo applications. I talk to guys all day long at car shows that regret their four-hole snipers. The thing that people think that they're going to get with a 4-hole throttle body is everything that a carburetor does, because this is how they're promoted. They think that they're going to get everything that a carburetor does, plus the ability to individually tune, not cylinders, but individually tune specific RPM ranges and get better fuel mileage because they can dial in the air fuel. And I don't think I've seen that happen yet. Octane level has a profound effect on engine tuning in general. Well, we've run a motor on the dyno and run it on 91, 100, 110, 112, and 114 and never changed the jets on it. And it runs the same. It made the same power every time, except the 100. The 100 was oxygenated, so it actually leaned out just a little bit on the 100, but not enough to where we thought it was going to hurt anything. So all of that works just fine. So the problem is that people, when you make a statement like that, people think, oh, I got to completely retune it. I've got to change the jets, like 10 jets or whatever. And you don't have to do any of that. The Octane doesn't have a big effect unless it's oxygenated. I saw a YouTube video about 3D printed Inconel turbo manifolds. That would be cool. The Inconel stuff is really neat. It's just expensive too. eBay has steel fabricated intake manifolds. Steel ones or aluminum ones? I don't know how inexpensive a K24 is anymore. What are those? What's a K24A2, like a JDM kind of deal? What are those things selling for now? I think I bought mine for $700 or $800 when I bought mine. So how's our poll doing? 53% saying no and 47% saying yes on our EGT reading. Dan, how much lighter is the Inconel than the stainless? I know it depends on wall thickness, but if we had equal wall thickness, we had a K24 swap last week. A motor was $250 from a wrecking yard. What K24 did you find from a junkyard? Not a TSX or something good, right? Kevin, if you were to recommend a compression ratio for a 416 build for boost, what would your recommendation be? Well, I have a few questions first. My question would be, how much power are you trying to make? The second is, what are you going to use it for? If it was for a class specific racing deal where you have a limited turbo, then I would recommend a higher compression. If you're trying to run it on pump gas, I would recommend a lower compression. I don't know what you're trying to do. Have you already built the 416? Because it's also possible that you don't need a 416, that you could do what you're doing with just a 6-liter and make the amount of power that you're going to make. So I would have some questions, but normally it's going to be less than 10-1. Richard, are you going to do any more testing with the K series? Yes. A small block Chevy, the 2 o'clock timing and 12 o'clock time mark for the TDC. Is there a certain set of years they were at 12 or 2 o'clock? I don't know. Mine seems to be at 12 o'clock, but can find only one tab. I don't remember correlating that. We always just TDC the motor, and then because a lot of times we don't have the right front cover or timing marker, or we have an adjustable timing marker, and we may not have the right dampener also. So we'll TDC the motor so that we know that the number one piston's at TDC, and then putting the damper on, then we put a mark or an arrow, a piece of wire, or the timing marker that's adjustable, or the timing marker turns out to be right. We just want to make sure that we know where zero is. And honestly, for what we're doing on the engine dyno, if it's within 1 or 2 degrees, it doesn't matter because we just have a starting point. So we're just going to add timing until it stops making power. So honestly, if that number says 36 or it says 35 or 34 or 29 or whatever it says, I'm less concerned about that. The 160 horsepower K24. Okay. In drag racing, carbureted motors is an AFR gauge you prefer to use? No, there's lots of good ones. Innovate makes one. AEM makes one. Holly probably has some. Pump gas, drag daily. Then I would tend to aim toward a lower compression, like 9-1. So Daniel, have you done back-to-back tests on Octane? Like on the same day, on the same motor, just changing the Octane and watch what it does? Not over different days or in different combinations or those kinds of things. Have you done an actual test where you've drained all of the fuel out like we did and then put other kinds of fuel in? I have a 2000 Trans Am swapped in a 5.3 truck engine. Do you happen to know if I can use the truck oil pressure sender by changing the plug on the car? I don't know that. Titanium headers. I think the only titanium headers I've ever seen would be for one of the import applications. Craig, what has Gail Banks been talking about for years? About EGTs? Titanium has a heat rating less than half of the Inconel. Yeah, and these were endurance motors that they were using the Inconel headers on, so I'm sure they wanted them to last. $450C versus $1100C for Inconel. That's why they use it in exhaust valves. It works good. I heard cam timing. I don't know if I've ever tested. I don't know if I've ever swung cam timing and watched at the EGTs. I could see how that would work, but as we talked about, ignition timing certainly does that. Is there any kind of formula where we can figure out the compression ratio of a small block Chevy without tearing it apart to measure stuff? No, the only information that you can get is you can get a cranking compression, but that's not going to tell you the static compression though. You might be able to measure it, but because you're not going to know what the if it would seal up enough. Could you measure the volume inside maybe somehow? But I think it would leak though. What are some of the things you found about O2 sensor placement and accuracy? Well, the problems, like most of these things that we talk about, are at extremes. If you put the O2 sensor at the end of the exhaust, the reading's not going to be good because you're, especially at light throttles, because you get reversion back up. So we see that when we have it in the header toward the end of the collector extension. You don't get the right air fuel until you're at wide open throttle and you have a ton of flow, so that you get no reversion back into that pipe. That would be one thing. Where the sensor is in each cylinder would be affected, because if you have it down the collector, you're getting an average of 4 cylinders. So you have it at an individual cylinder, you're reading that. Other than that, I don't think that you're getting an accuracy problem, because I don't know how it's going to change unless there's a leak somewhere in the system. In a sealed system, that shouldn't be a problem. Some people talk about on the O2s the delay between if you have it farther away from the exhaust, and that some RPM would go by before the air fuel meter reads and displays what it is. Did it really get it at that RPM? And so they're just telling you that there's a difference in the RPM versus the air fuel at that RPM, that it might be skewed one way or the other because of delay in that. But I don't think that that's very much. Dan, why did the lower compression have higher EGTs? Daniel, we do get that a lot. We get people that will come in and argue and say that, oh no, you got to completely redo it when you, like, if you put 114 octane in there and you run 91. I'm like, the air fuel is the same. The only thing that changed is its resistance to detonation. But if the timing is the same, it's not doing anything. It's having no effect at all. And because the other thing is, people think that octane is also related to burn rate, and it's not. Those two things are separate things. You can adjust the burn rate of the fuel, which could have an effect on air fuel, and not change the air fuel, and vice versa. You can do the other thing too, but people get locked in and think, oh yeah, That's the reasoning behind 87 octane and 91, and you get better fuel mileage with 87 because the burn rate's so much different. Well, the burn rate has nothing to do with the octane. They're not they're correlated, but or their relationship is not a causal relationship. It's correlated, which means they can be affected, but they don't have to be. Has anyone done 102 sensor per cylinder? Yeah, we do that all the time on the dyno. We take individual cylinder readings. That's how we determine whether or not an intake manifold is has even air fuel distribution. That's what we did on the when we're looking at what's happening with the water meth injection. Again, with nitrous, all of these things usually require AO2s on a V8. Fill a cylinder with oil at TDC, then lower the piston at the bottom of the cylinder. Make sure that's what I was talking about. But I think it's going to leak past the rings. Did a push on a small block Chevy or stock bottom N53 using the 459 cam. I don't remember what we used on push rods. I always, when I'm putting a cam in, I always measure the push rod length to see if it's okay as I'm putting the rocker on. I just do that as a matter of, it's just part of the assembly procedure anymore, especially with as many camshafts as I do. So I just test it to make sure that when I'm putting it on, it has somewhere between maybe more than a quarter of a turn to 1.5 turns, and anywhere in there. Ideally, the push rod length would be changed also, so it would be the same between camshafts. But for some of the things that I'm doing, that's not an issue. Lower compression causes slower burn rate. Okay. Beryllium is very highly toxic. That's bad stuff. So how would you tune timing on a motor based on EGT? I wouldn't do that. EGTs do drop when you put more timing in it, and then pistons drop out of it. Are there things not to do with an O2 sensor? Yeah, there are heat limitations on some of these O2 sensors. So some people don't like to run them between the head and the turbo. We always run them after the turbo. But we've seen EGTs that are 13, 14, 1500 degrees, and it didn't hurt the O2 sensor. I don't know how long they'll take that though. No leaded fuel. Yeah, if you run leaded fuels, then the O2 sensors typically don't like that. They'll last for a while, but it does tend to make them go out. Chris, the pressure is not going to affect the O2 reading. Fred, does higher intake air temperatures directly correlate to higher EGTs? So far, we've seen that it does. When in the testing, I did a bunch of testing with the guys at Kenny Bell, and when the air temperature was higher, the EGT was also higher if you didn't change anything else. Hendrix, when beryllium was in fashion, they used a lot of beryllium copper stuff. Do you guys use it for valve seats? I know that they were using beryllium for brakes in Formula One also, and I think that they outlawed it because it's so bad for people. How do you keep EGTs down on a diesel? You adjust that with airflow and fuel flow. How many GT45s do you need to get 2,000 horsepower out of an Iron Duke? You have to keep replacing the Iron Duke part of that. Sean, you work with it in Philadelphia? Valve seats and guides. They stopped using it. Yeah. Actually, most sanctioning bodies went to no exotic materials. Yeah. Are they still using titanium though? Is that considered exotic? Or is that just like 5 minutes ago? So does the EGT reading show whether the motor's rich or lean? We're going to end our poll at 52% saying yes. So the yeses have caught up to the no's and passed them on the big end. Off topic, but did I miss the plug indexing video? No, that test hasn't been done yet. Did you see Garage 54's carbon fiber push rod or pistons? I mean, I haven't seen that. And they showed up with a block that had carbon sleeves and carbon pistons. I knew we were in a whole different world. That's kind of cool, but they get the are they carbon ceramic brakes that they're using? Because they're using carbon rotors, right? And so those got to get what's a rotor temperature? That's got to be as hot as a piston, right? I thought you said you don't like doing individual oxygen sensors on cylinders per cylinder on LS. I'm just saying we've used it in testing a lot. But it has scared me because they're so far off. According to some of these comments, apparently I should be worried about being poisoned by the titanium valves in my Cleveland. Only if you're machining them. Rex, you're on your way to the junkyard to get an LS for Miata. That sounds like a perfect day. When is a 2.2 thousand horsepower dyno run? See, what kind of 2.2 would I have to do? That'd have to be a Honda, right? Richard, have you ever ridden a Boss Haas motorcycle? I haven't. I sat next to one. The guy had one. I think he had a 572 crate motor on his, if I remember right. I went out to pick something up from somebody in Arizona with my NSX. I remember distinctly. I think I went out to do a story with them, is what I did, and my buddy Jason went with me. And about a half an hour before I was supposed to leave, the window, the regulator or the track went out in this NSX, and so the window stayed down. And so we had to drive the whole time with no window up. Yeah, a Chrysler 2.2 would be asking a lot for that kind of power. I'm certain you could do it with the T3 versions with the 4-valve head, or with the later Neon, the SRT4 motor. I'm sure you could. I mean, it flows enough and has enough NA power potential to get to 1,000 horsepower. It'd be much harder to do with the 8-valve motor. Aren't the titanium valves an alloy? How about doing a diesel engine? I won't run a diesel engine on the engine dyno. What motor should I put in my F100? Well, are you towing with it? A diesel is really, really good for low RPM torque for towing heavy stuff. 460 works pretty good, but a gas motor is just not as good as a diesel for doing that specific thing. Richard, do you think a V8 on a motorcycle will last longer when it comes to engine life? It certainly has less load, but probably not, because it probably doesn't get ridden as much. I think when they did I'm sure of it, when they set the records out at Bonneville, they made the 2.2 smaller. They brought it down to a 2 liter because it's in a much more favorable class. Wasn't it called the Tomahawk? They did have one that had a Viper V10 also. I might like to tow a trailer sometime, but not a lot. Yeah, if it's not a dedicated thing, then a 460 works fine. A 460 makes a lot of torque, so you would have no trouble towing a trailer, especially if you geared it properly. 460s are fun. On an NA application, when outside air temperature, would you increase ignition timing to keep EGTs lower if that relates? Yeah, but you're talking about a change in if on an NA motor, you're talking about a change in inlet air or air temperature of 10 degrees or 20 degrees. If the EGT changes 10 or 20 degrees, that's not a big deal. In fact, it's hard to get it to be that repeatable. So we're worried about big changes, a few 100 degrees. I just got an 89 LeBaron coupe. It has a stripe just like the 200-mile-an-hour car. That means it must go 200 then, right? We'll be doing more happy hour videos. Yeah, we will. Lisa and I will do some. Although now it's getting cold, so they probably won't be till spring. Like to see a 572 get to 200 horsepower per liter. That'd be a lot, but it is no, not 200 horsepower per liter. That'd be a whole bunch. Do you believe in extended break-in periods? We do those on the dyno. We have a break-in procedure that we go through. I see people blaming spun bearings on lack of break-in. I don't think that's a real thing. The break-in is more for the rings than anything else. We don't even break in roller cams. The rings and flat tappet cams are the big reason for break-in. The bearings, I don't see that being an issue. Yeah, 4-valve V10 would be cool. Pontiac used in-canal exhaust valves in the 73 and 74 Super Duty 455s. Two more minutes. Yeah, if you spun a rod bearing, it's probably not because of break-in. I haven't ever done any drifting. I think somebody just mentioned the Super Duty. Oh, that's you. Didn't you just tell us about the Pontiac ones? I thought you did. Bauxite. Even Vanessa made a joke about bauxite on Last Man Standing because she's a geologist. Important safety tip. Anyways, on the top of your head, to make 500 horsepower on a 6-liter. Yes, go take a look at there's a couple of videos up there. Well, there's lots of videos up. There's endless videos up now that I think about it on 6-liter performance stuff. So there's a video up how to make 500 horsepower with your LS. It's going to be there. There's maximize 6-liter performance. There's a bunch of them there. 500 horsepower from a 6-liter LS is just a cam and springs. Would be cool to do emissions legal testing like the camshaft that I put up yesterday or the day before. Trying to put a 5.3 twin turbo in a Chevy Love. Should I bed mount the radiator? Will the radiator not fit up front? The turbos going in the bed are cool though. That comp cam that I ran for the small block was a emissions legal cam. That pure energy one. 50 state legal performance upgrade for 87 and early carbureted small block V8s. That's the only one I see there. That's the pure energy. That is a 203 212 cam. Do they have a stock class? I don't know what you mean by stock class. The classes at Bonneville are varied dramatically and are based on one of the bases is displacement. So you can run the same car with a bunch of different engine configurations ranging from less than a liter, less than a half a liter, all the way up to as big as you want. And then with delineations all the way through there. 1 liter, 2 liter, 3 liter, so on so. So they have all of those broken down. And then they also have streamliners and lakesters and production cars and blown gas coupes and blown modified, all kinds of stuff that allow different levels of modifications on them. And they have some that are classes where you're not allowed any body modifications. But that doesn't mean that that's a stock car. Like it doesn't have a stock motor in it or anything. Don't they really sold airplane gas tanks? Yeah, belly tankers. Those are cool. I'd like to have one of those just to drive around. Fun fact that aluminum was more valuable than gold. aluminum was $2,000 an ounce. Seems like a lot. Some folks from up here where I'm from held a Streamliner record at Bonneville for a while. The Streamliners are cool. Packaging the engine and stuff is in the Streamliner is very, very interesting. All the good stuff seems too bad for us. That is true. And on that note, it's time to go. Thank you for joining me on the morning edition. Go get your projects done. I'll be back tonight at 7, and I'm working on a video right now showing you what happens when you run a nitrous cam. That's right. It's in air quotes because, well, you know about nitrous cams. I'll see you guys all tonight. Pow, pow, bang, zoom.